Heber Valley Corridor Environmental Impact Statement virtual public meeting. We'll be getting started here in just a minute, and we thank you all for being here with us tonight. Okay, it is now 6 o'clock, and that's time for the meeting to start. So to be respectful to everyone and their time, we'll go ahead and get started now. Thank you everyone for joining us. Welcome to the Heber Valley Corridor Environmental Impact Statement virtual public meeting. And with that, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, and I'll just kind of go over what the agenda is for tonight. So I will start off with introductions and then move on to project background and overview, talk a little bit about public involvement overview, speak to the project needs and scope that we've found so far, and then we'll go into a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. We'll jump to the next slide and on to the next one. So as I introduce, you can see the names. My name is Jeremy Baum. I'm the UDOT project manager on this environmental impact statement. We also have Jeff Dupay with us, who is our UDOT Region 3 communications manager. Naomi Keeson, who is our UDOT environmental manager for this project. And Vince Izzo, who is our Heber Valley Corridor team project manager, as well as Andrea Clayton, who is our Heber Valley Corridor project team environmental lead. Charles Allen, who is our Heber Valley Corridor team traffic lead. Brianna Benabus, who is our part of our Heber Valley Corridor public involvement team. And then we also have Justin Smart, who is our Heber Valley Corridor team public involvement lead, and he'll also be moderating the meeting for us tonight and the question and answer session. And I'm going to turn the time over to him for just a second to do some of that moderating.
Thanks, Jeremy. And I'd like to just echo Jeremy's appreciation for all of you that have joined us tonight. This is a little bit of a different environment to meet virtually about an important topic. And so we thank everybody for going through the various steps you had to take to join us. Many of you have probably seen on the study website a participant guide that we made available, and it's available for you to grab at any time tonight and make reference to as we meet. But I want to just walk you through those steps to kind of orient everybody so that we're all on the same page as to how the meeting will go. And much of what I'm going to cover is in that participant guide. So again, if you want to reference that after my portion is done right now, you can grab that as a PDF download from the website. So first of all, as you may have already noticed, this is going to be a presentation format for the first part of the meeting, where as soon as I'm done with this portion, Jeremy will take over and present a lot of information about the study and about what we've learned so far and what the next steps are in the overall process. And then we'll have a question and answer section at the end, toward the end of the meeting. So as we go through, everybody's going to remain on mute while Jeremy's presenting. And then when we get to the Q&A, I'll be moderating that portion, and we'll take questions and alternate between written questions and verbal questions. And I'll go into a little more detail about how that will happen when we get to that point. This overall presentation and meeting is going to be recorded, and it'll be available on the project website as soon as we get it packaged up and ready to put out there, and we'll send an email to our stakeholder list when that's posted. So if you have people that you know of that wanted to participate but couldn't make it for whatever reason tonight, the entire meeting will be there for them to view and review on their own. When we get to the question and answer period, as Jeremy said, we want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so we are going to end promptly at 8 o'clock. And so we'll get through as many questions as we can during that Q&A. And again, as I said, you'll be able to chat questions in when we get there, and you'll be able to raise your hand virtually, whether you're on the phone or joining us online, and we'll just work through those questions back and forth as we go. We're going to ask people that choose to speak to keep their comment or their question to 3 minutes maximum. And we're going to limit people to just one question, again, in the interest of getting through as many folks as we can. Submitting a question in the chat box or raising your hand tonight, if we run out of time, it's not a guarantee that we'll be able to answer all the questions, but everything that's posted tonight, and the comments that we receive over the coming month during the comment period will be aggregated together. The team will go through all those, and we'll prepare a frequently asked questions that it tries to address as many of those questions or issues as we can. We'd like to request and remind everybody that we're all people, and we're asking everybody to show respect to each other and to our presenters, to the study team tonight. Any questions or comments that come in that include foul language or threats or obscenity, we're just going to get rid of those right away, and we might have to remove those people posting those from the meeting at UDOT's discretion. Another reminder that the questions and comments that come in during this meeting will be helpful, and they'll be useful to moving the study forward, but they won't be considered formal comments. Just like in a regular open house environment, we would ask you to write down a comment on a comment card. We don't have that option, of course, tonight, but we have made many options available via the study website. So if you visit Heber Valley EIS.udot.utah.gov, all of the options to comment are available there. There's a comment form right on the site. There's a map-based comment form where you can submit thoughts or questions about particular locations within the valley. There's a phone number where you can leave us a voicemail. There's also a mailing address where you can mail us a hard copy if that's what your preference is. That comment period goes from tonight until September 26th, so just about a month from now. And there should be links coming up in the chat that you can link over to the study site. Just a couple more things, and then I'll turn it back to Jeremy. On the site where you found the link to this meeting tonight, down toward the bottom, there's a participant sign-in link. And if you haven't already done so, we would invite you to go back to that page, click on that participant sign-in link, and sign into the meeting so that we have a record of who attended. There's also some other information that you can provide that helps us with ensure non-discrimination, and it's all voluntary. But if you'll leave us at least your contact information, we can keep in touch with you as the study progresses. There should be a link to that specific spot on our site in the chat. And then finally, as Jeremy's presenting, there will be some graphics in the presentation. If you find those graphics a little hard to see or decipher, we have a fact sheet that's been posted on our website that contains not all, but a lot of the graphics that are being presented tonight. So if you need to follow along and pull that fact sheet down and take a look, you'll be able to do that. And then of course, we'll be posting the presentation along with the recording of the video in its entirety after the fact tomorrow or early next week. So with that, again, I'll orient everybody a little bit more on the Q&A when we get to that portion, but for now I'm going to turn it back to Jeremy, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Justin, very much. Appreciate that. And we'll continue now with the presentation. So we'll move to the next slide. We'll be talking about the project background and overview now. So a little bit about the project background. Some of you, probably many of you know, UDOT recently completed last year with Heber City a corridor planning study, which was studying a possible bypass around Heber City for US 40. And this study didn't didn't end up having any recommendations, except that further and more in-depth analysis was needed. Hence this environmental impact statement study that we're doing now. And along with that, UDOT knows and understands that Heber City and Wasatch County have been considering a bypass road for more than 20 years now, and that this bypass has been identified in the Wasatch County Master Transportation Plan and the Heber City General Plan, among other areas as well. We are also aware that Heber City and Wasatch County have been acquiring right-of-way for this western bypass through various methods. And that 2019 planning study that we did evaluate different alternatives for this western bypass. And none of these alternatives that were studied before, or this information from previous studies by the county or city, are giving any sort of direct or specific input to this study other than informing us. None of those alternatives we're not starting from there and saying, okay, this is what we're going to push forward. We're aware of those, but we have no predetermined outcomes with this study. We are currently trying to understand what the transportation issues are, and then we can work on solving them from there. We'll move on to the next slide then. Project overview. This is kind of an overview map of what the study area is. As you can see, it's the Heber Valley. So right now we're starting and we're looking at and trying to understand what the transportation issues are for the Heber Valley as a whole. And obviously we'll be focusing some of our efforts on US 40 through Heber City, the Heber City Main Street section, as that is where the majority of the traffic impacts are currently. And so we are conducting this environmental impact statement to evaluate transportation solutions to improve mobility through the Heber Valley and improve operations of Heber Main Street. And our mission is to keep Utah moving while enhancing the quality of life through transportation. Moving on, we'll talk about project timeline and process. So as you can see in this, currently we are in the NEPA overview and early scoping phase. And as I mentioned before, we are currently collecting information on transportation needs or problems, issues that we need to consider through the EIS. And at some high level, we are understanding what potential alternatives are, although we won't be going into in-depth analysis on that till next year. We are currently holding our first public meeting for this right now. And our public comment period starts tonight and will go for until September 26th. And you can see on this graphic, there are some key points throughout the process where we will be engaging the public. And not all of our public engagement will be public meetings. Some of it will be, maybe at some point in time, we'll be able to meet in person. Maybe throughout this entire study, we'll be doing virtual meetings. We don't know that yet. But some of that public engagement will just be publishing information and allowing public comment on that. So, but you can kind of see our plan as we go throughout this project. We anticipate being able to file our notice of intent to formally begin the EIS process early next year. And we anticipate that the EIS process will take about 2 years for us to come to a decision. So completion of this project will likely be in early 2023. And that decision will identify the final preferred alternative and allow a project to move forward once funding can become available. Moving on. I'd like to talk a little bit about our stakeholder working group. So we've created a stakeholder working group to serve as a sounding board for this project and as a community, a communications conduit to the community. We have about 18 members that are representing diverse viewpoints throughout the community. And our intent is to keep the group small and manageable so that we can have productive meetings. So we're limiting the number of members and asking them to represent their community and their stakeholder group. And like I mentioned before, we want it to be a conduit of communication and back and forth. So their role is to help us facilitate communication between the project team and these various groups. We'll meet with this group throughout this process at different project milestones, such as scoping, alternative development, the draft EIS, and so forth. And we'll be posting any presentations to this group and notes from the meetings on our website. So you can find that information there as we move forward. Those notes will likely include the stakeholder working group members and the areas they represent. So moving on, we will start to talk about the public involvement objectives, and you can see those on the left there. And so UDOT's objective for public participation is to openly collaborate to better understand community goals and understand issues surrounding transportation needs in this area. The communication with the public will help this team help UDOT better develop transportation solutions. And finally, through this open communication, we will walk the public through the EIS process step by step, so you can understand how we arrive at the final decision. And as we use these objectives, as you can see there on the right, our solution will become an economically feasible, technically sound, and environmentally appropriate solution that the community has seen the process so they can support the process. We'll move on now to a video that we've created that helps explain the EIS process and how the public can engage and provide input in this process. So now we'll go ahead and play that video. Thank you.
Did you know that every transportation project in Utah goes through a rigorous planning and evaluation process before any construction starts? Let's take a closer look. Transportation projects are developed as a result of a long-range planning process, as well as UDOT's work to preserve and maintain the state's transportation infrastructure. An important step in the project development process is performing an environmental analysis. When a project is federally funded, or when other federal actions are required, then this analysis must follow the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as the NEPA process. The NEPA process ensures agencies make informed decisions. It requires disclosure of impacts to ecological, historic, cultural, economic, and social resources, both potentially adverse and beneficial. The NEPA process often benefits from public involvement and participation, which helps lead to better solutions. Once the needs of an area have been identified, UDOT then determines the level of NEPA analysis required, which could be a categorical exclusion, or CAT-X, an environmental assessment called an EA, or an environmental impact statement, which we'll refer to as an EIS. A CAT-X is a type of environmental review process conducted for certain types of actions that, based upon past experience with similar actions, do not involve significant environmental impacts. However, when there is uncertainty whether significant impacts are expected, an environmental assessment, or EA, is prepared. If there will be significant impacts, or if the potential for significant impacts is likely, UDOT will begin an environmental impact statement, or EIS. Now let's take a look at the EIS process, the most rigorous form of NEPA analysis. EIS process. The first phase in the EIS process is to determine the range of issues to be addressed in the study, also known as scoping. Early in the process, before decisions are made, public input helps identify transportation issues that should be addressed. Public involvement is critical to developing a reasonable range of alternatives. The next phase of an EIS is to determine the purpose and need. The need identifies the existing as well as future challenges that will need to be addressed. The purpose defines a statement of goals and objectives that the study will address. Next, potential transportation alternatives are developed. The alternatives to be evaluated are informed by previous studies, local planning efforts, input from the public, other stakeholders, from technical analysis of traffic, and safety data. The alternatives are then developed by the project team. These alternatives are presented to the public in various ways, such as public meetings or online where community input is gathered. After the initial alternatives are evaluated, the alternatives that meet the purpose and need will be carried forward for further environmental analysis. The NEPA analysis includes a review of environmental laws and regulations, such as the Endangered Species Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, the Clean Water Act, the Environmental Justice Executive Order, and many others. Experts will study potential impacts to resources, such as parks and schools, air, noise, wetlands, threatened and endangered species, and many others. Once potential impacts have been identified and evaluated, a draft EIS or EEIS is prepared. The public is provided an opportunity to review and comment on the potential transportation alternatives, as well as the potential impacts to the built and natural environment from these alternatives. The draft EIS will identify a preferred alternative based on its potential impacts and how well it meets the purpose and need. Public input on the information contained in the draft EIS is critical at this stage. Comments on the draft EIS are most helpful when they are concise and provide useful, relevant information for UDOT to consider before making its final decision. UDOT will then review public comments and conduct further analysis as needed to prepare the final EIS or FEIS. UDOT will provide responses to substantive comments received during the official DEIS comment period in the FEIS. These responses can be in the form of changes in the FEIS, factual corrections, modifications to the analysis or the alternatives, new alternatives considered, or an explanation of why a comment does not require changes to the EIS. Once the FEIS is complete, UDOT will issue a Record of Decision, or ROD, which identifies the final selected alternative. The FEIS and ROD may be issued simultaneously if certain conditions are met. The final decision will rely on factual data, policy matters, and public input. This is a critical step required to move forward with implementing any transportation solution. Once the EIS process is complete, and when funding is identified and allocated, final design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction of a transportation project may begin. Commenting. Now that you understand a little more about the steps, let's address perhaps the most important contribution from the public during this process: public comment. It's important to make sure your comments are clear, concise, and relevant to the project. Comments received early in the process, during the scoping phase, for example, are particularly helpful to inform purpose and need for the action. Early comments also contribute to developing a range of reasonable alternatives. In drafting comments, try to focus on the purpose and need of the proposed action, the proposed alternatives, the assessment of the environmental impacts of those alternatives, and the proposed mitigation of potential impacts. Comments that are solution-oriented and provide specific examples will be more effective than those that simply state support or opposition to the proposed action or alternative. Commenting is not a form of voting on an alternative. The number of negative comments an agency receives does not prevent an action from moving forward. Numerous comments that repeat the same basic message of support or opposition will typically be responded to collectively. In addition, general comments that state an action will have significant environmental effects will not help UDOT make a better decision unless the relevant causes and environmental effects are clearly explained. The NEPA EIS process has previously been implemented in a range of UDOT projects. Public input is a critical part of this process, and we encourage you to get involved. To find out about transportation projects in your area, visit udot.utah.gov.
All right. We'll go ahead and move on to the next slide now, and I will talk about current and upcoming activities. So we have conducted a series of 18 stakeholder interviews to gain a better understanding of the issues to consider in developing the purpose and need. We also talked a little bit about what potential alternatives may be, and talked about resources and issues important to the community, using that as information that we're gathering to help us identify issues. We're also currently conducting travel demand modeling and traffic simulation analysis, some of which we'll share with you tonight. this traffic analysis will compare today's traffic conditions to what we can expect to happen in 2050 if nothing is done. Existing roadway conditions, we'll be looking at US 40 and US 189 to see if current safety standards are being met, or if improvements need to be made there as well. We've also been looking into gathering existing information at a high level for wetlands, cultural resources, and wildlife resources, as well as some others. And more detailed surveys will be conducted next year when we have a better idea of what the alternatives could look like and what our study area is. And then we'll be working on the draft purpose and need throughout the remainder of this year. Let's move on to the next. And I'll begin to talk about project needs and scope. And so this is some of the information that we've gathered so far. Now we'll be talking a little bit about traffic data, and this is a little bit of information on how we obtain that traffic data and how we're using it. So many of you have probably noticed that traffic on Heber Main Street varies depending on the time of year. It's general heaviest during the summer when there's recreation traffic added to the mix. And for this project, UDOT collected traffic counts in summer of 2019 in order to capture some of the heaviest use so we could fully understand what the problem is. We have data for weekends as well as weekdays so we can see the variation. Solution to solve the worst problem during the peak hour of the busiest day of the year. That would just be too expensive, cause too many impacts. It's not feasible. So we generally try to find a solution that works most of the time. You may hear things like 100th highest hour is what we're designing to, or 85th percentile, or and that just kind of gives you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish. We're not trying to solve the absolute worst case scenario, but we're trying to make sure that we have a transportation solution that will work. And as you can see in that graphic, you know, kind of the heaviest times, most of our traffic data was actually collected. It shows June, July, and August. Most of it was July and August. So not quite the absolute heaviest peak according to this graph, but during some of the heaviest times. So we'll move on to the next slide where we'll talk about Heber Valley by the numbers. So this graphic is just showing kind of the expected population increase between now and 2050. 2050 is our horizon year that we're designing to. So as you can see in this, population is expected to nearly double. Households will more than double. Employment's going to increase. Maybe not quite as much as the other things on this graph, and that's probably primarily due to the number of second homes in the area. It seems to be a popular area for second homes. So let's move on to the next topic. We'll be talking about overall travel growth. VMT stands for vehicle miles traveled. And as you can see in this, you know, as population increases, traffic is going to increase, right? And so we can see in this graph that the comparison between Heber Valley increases and the Summit and Wasatch County combined increases. So while the travel is much, much higher for those two counties combined, you can see that the increases are greater in Heber Valley than they are in the two counties combined, meaning most of the growth is going to happen here in Heber Valley. Let's move on to the next topic. We'll talk about north-south volumes. So this graphic kind of shows the distribution of vehicles traveling north and south in the Heber Valley, where most of that north-south travel is happening. And as you can see with this graphic, Main Street is obviously carrying that load. Most north-south traffic is on Main Street. There is obviously some other north-south traffic elsewhere, but most of it is on Main Street. I also wanted to point out that, you know, 65% of 45,000 vehicles is still less than 60% of 63,000 vehicles. So Main Street will continue to carry the majority of the traffic in 2050, and it'll increase from what it is now. So let's move on to the next topic, and I'll talk about some traffic flow. So through our analysis, we kind of picked some points to see how traffic was flowing through them. In this graphic, we're showing how traffic flows on Main Street through Center Street. And the intent of this graphic, it's not to really show the traffic numbers or average daily traffic counts, but more to show where vehicles are coming from or going to as they travel north or south on Main Street through this point. So one of the takeaways here is most of the vehicles that pass through this point on Main Street at Center Street are actually internal to the Heber Valley, meaning both their origin and destination, or their start and stop, are within the Heber Valley. And just further defining, making sure everyone understands the next thing there down, the start or end of the vehicle, of the travel, excuse me, is meaning that either the travel starts in the valley and goes somewhere else, or it starts somewhere else and ends in the valley. And then that bottom one is pure pass-through traffic. Doesn't stop at all in the Heber Valley, just passes straight through. So some interesting information there. Let's move on to the next topic, and we'll talk about level of service. So how well a road can handle traffic can be measured by the level of service. And level of service is based on delay, and it's kind of like a grade on a report card. Level of service A is excellent, free-flowing conditions, and level of service F is failing. We have gridlock conditions, excessive delays, frustration. And so our goal in an urban area is level of service D, which is considered adequate. It would be way too expensive for us, as I mentioned before, to build everything to a level, every roadway, so that at all times it operates at a level of service A. All of our highways would just be these great big wide massive corridors, which I don't think is feasible or practical. So existing traffic conditions during the PM peak hour show that we have a failing level of service on Main Street near Center Street, and I'm talking about the arterial segment travel speeds there. So we have two different types of level of service. We have the arterial travel speeds, or we have intersection level of service. So as you can see on that graphic, the speeds are pretty slow as you get close to Center Street, even now in the PM peak hour. And then as we go to 2050 no build, it shows what traffic on Main Street would look like in 2050 if we make no improvements, meaning no bypass, no capacity improvements on US 40. It's just as it is now. The simulation and modeling does assume, though, that other projects that are on the long range plan are built. For example, the SR 32 US 40 interchange. And so in 2050, we see Heber City, the intersections drop to level of service E and F, and our speeds slow significantly, and travel times increase. So, and then another point I want to make on this, through our analysis, the average traffic backup north of 500 North in the southbound direction currently is around 275 feet, which is just a little under the length of a football field, right? Through our analysis in 2050, if nothing is done, it's projected to be on average 6,300 feet in length, which is about 1.25 miles. So significantly more backup there coming into town from the north. And over the course of that PM peak hour, only about 80% of the vehicles actually made it south through that 5th North intersection into Heber City. So projecting some significant delays coming into the city from the north if nothing's done. Let's move on. and we'll talk about travel times. And so as you can see there, today it takes about 4.5 minutes to drive southbound from 500 North to 189 during the PM peak hour. And by 2050, we're expecting that travel time to increase to about 7.5 minutes. So that's a pretty significant increase there, about 60% longer in time to travel from the north to the south during the PM peak in the future. Going northbound, the travel time is still going to increase, just not as significantly, from about 4 minutes, 10 seconds to about 5.5 minutes or so. And at UDOT, we think those delays in aggregate, and when you multiply, 3 or 4 minutes by thousands of trips each day, becomes something that needs to be addressed. Moving on, we'll talk about Main Street afternoon peak hour and kind of what sort of vehicles we're seeing during that PM peak hour on Main Street. So as you can see by this graphic, the large majority of the vehicles traveling Main Street during that PM peak hour, which is about 5 to 6 p.m., comes from private vehicles. And then we also, in this analysis, we kind of broke out those next two categories to the left are still private vehicles, but they're longer private vehicles. They're trailers and RVs, they're trucks pulling boats. That's kind of our recreation private vehicle category. And then we also have a kind of work-based private vehicle category, which is, your small business construction companies or landscape companies that have their little utility trailer or work trailer behind their pickup truck or whatever. That's kind of what falls into that category. So overall, those three categories are still our private vehicle, regular cars category, but those longer personal vehicles do kind of have a different effect on how traffic moves through the city during that PM peak than just your standard car does. And then those next three categories are all what is considered heavy trucks, or when you hear percent trucks or something like that, when someone from UDOT speaking, those three categories all fit into that. So that, that's a total of 4% trucks during the PM peak hour. But then we went ahead and broke it out into what kind of trucks we're seeing. So we have the single unit truck category, the multi-unit truck category, and then the multi-unit trucks that are oil gas. Those are the trucks going from the basin to Salt Lake Valley to the refineries and back. And those actually make up about, there's about 600 to 700 total tanker trucks per day going through Heber City, based on these numbers. So yeah, it looks like when you see 1%, you may think, oh, that's nothing, but I mean, there are a fair amount of tanker trucks coming through here. Let's move on to the next topic then, where we're talking about crash information. So some of our preliminary information, we're also collecting crash data, crash information. So we kind of know what safety issues there are that maybe we need to look at or correct. And during this analysis, we decided to look at 3 other cities to compare to, and we picked these 3 cities because they are of similar size, with a state route running right through the middle of them, serving as their main street. So they have some similarities for us to compare to. As you can see as you look on this graphic, for the statewide average, when you look at commercial motor vehicle crashes, it has NA, because that's something that at UDOT we don't typically categorize and collect and catalog and log that data. But we thought, due to the number of trucks going through this corridor and understanding that there is a safety concern with that we would look into what that crash rate is. And that hence one of the reasons we wanted to kind of compare to other similar cities throughout the state. And as you look at that one, you can see that between these 3 other cities that were selected, Heber City is about in the middle of that range. And looking at all crashes, we can see that Heber City is is higher than the statewide average. And again, kind of middle of the range with the other 3 cities that we compared to. And you can find the information for severe crashes there as well. Lower than the statewide average there, and lower than 2, but still higher than one of the other cities that we're looking at. So that's just some of the crash information we have to help us understand what some of the issues are that we may need to look into. Let's move on. And that will bring us to our question and answer portion of this meeting. Thank you for listening to that presentation. And now I'll turn some time over to Justin to get us going on the questions and answers.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Want to just, like I mentioned earlier, we want to delve into how to participate now just a little bit more deeply so that everybody's oriented. And we recognize that you're probably working on a number of different devices and platforms, and not every device you're using is going to be the same, but we're going to provide at least hopefully some helpful tips to know how to engage tonight. So first of all, what we're going to do is we'll just kind of go on a first come, first served basis. Down at the bottom of your screen, and this is of course different for those of you who may be participating by phone only, but those of you who are on a device or a computer, you may need to move your mouse or touch your screen to get a menu bar to come up at the bottom. But down there, there should be a chat now, and if you hit that chat button, a box will come up over in the right-hand side of your screen, and we welcome you to chat in your comment or your question there. We have a team that's at the ready, and they're going to be cataloging and organizing these so that we can go through them in the order that we see them. And even as the chat grows, we'll still be tracking them. So don't worry that you're going to be left out. So that's one option. If you'd like to speak your comment or your question, we're going to ask you to raise your hand virtually. And so if you also down there at the bottom of your screen, if you click on the participants list, it'll populate a list over on the right-hand side of your screen. And down at the bottom, there should be a raise hand feature. You may need to click a more button to see the raise hand feature. But if you click that raise hand, then you'll be put in a virtual queue that I can follow over here on the right side of my screen. And we'll be going through those again in order. And we'll alternate back between the chat, those that we receive typed comments, and those that want to speak verbally. If you happen to be on the phone only and you don't have these things that you can click or touch on your screen, you can still raise your hand and get in the speaker queue by hitting *9 on your phone. And that will put you in the speaker queue with a raised hand. And then once we get to our first speaker, I just want to talk everybody through how that will work. We're asking everybody, we're keeping everybody on mute for now, and that's so that we can hear each other. As everybody who's participated in one of these meetings knows, it's so easy to start talking over somebody else and then you don't hear or understand anything. And so we're keeping everybody on mute until it's your turn to speak. So I'll call on you either by name or what you got listed as your screen name, or if you're on the phone, I'll just read out maybe the last 4 numbers of your phone number so that you know you're kind of up. And then I'll be able to unmute you on my end, but then you'll also need to unmute yourself on your end. So if you're on a device, when I click unmute, you'll get a notification that says you can unmute yourself. You'll be able to share your comment or your question. The team will be able to respond, and then we'll put you back on mute and lower your hand and then move over to the chat and then come back to the next speaker. If you're on a phone, you'll need to, when I unmute you, you'll need to hit *6 to unmute yourself. And then again, same thing, we'll let you ask your question or comment, and then we'll lower your hand, mute you, and we'll move on. So I know that was a lot of kind of technical jargony stuff to go through, but unfortunately that's the world we're living in, and hopefully it doesn't become too much of a barrier for your participation. So let's see. I'll do just couple more quick reminders. We are asking people to just ask one question, and if you'd like to speak, we're asking you to keep it to 3 minutes or less. And that's, both of those are just in the interest of responding to as many people as we can tonight. And final reminder is that we do want to end the meeting. We will end the meeting right at 8 in the interest of everyone's time. And so as we get closer to that, I'll kind of give everybody a check that we're, kind of maybe coming into the last 2 or 3 questions, and then the last question, and then we'll just leave a little bit of time at the end to remind everybody about next steps, how to communicate with us moving forward, and then for Jeremy to sign us off. So, all
Justin,
right. Yes.
Do you
Jeremy.
mind if I interrupt real quick? Sorry, I forgot to mention a couple things before I turn the time over to you. I wanted to remind everyone, besides what you just saw on the slides, we definitely want questions on that, but maybe also think about what transportation needs you see on Heber Main Street that should be addressed. What transportation needs do you see important to the community? What are your thoughts on the goals of any transportation improvements, and what resources are important to the community? Answering those sort of questions, as well as asking us questions about what we presented, will really help us better identify issues and kind of help us in that defining what our purpose and need should be. Sorry for interrupting. Go ahead and continue with the question and answer.
No, not at all. And in fact, I'll say one more thing related to that, and that is, I said this earlier as well, but for those that maybe joined us in progress, the Q&A, this portion of the meeting is absolutely going to be helpful, getting questions answered, hearing other questions that people in the community have, hearing the answers to those questions and comments. But to have it be an official comment that gets put into that record that we talked, or that you heard in the video, we'd like you to use the methods that are described on the project website. So just bear that in mind. We absolutely invite your comment and question during this Q&A portion, but please also go to the website and either submit a comment via the form, send us an email, leave us a voicemail, all those methods. So with that, let's jump over to our questions. So far, we don't have anyone with a hand raised, which is fine. We want you to be comfortable using whatever method is best for you. We do have a number of typed questions. So we'll start in with those, and we'll just continue moving through the typed questions until I see a raised hand and we have somebody that would like to speak. So it looks like we have a question from Rachel Collar, and I'm going to apologize if I mispronounce any names in advance. She asks, what was the day trips for Logan? It's interesting that Heber was in the same crash count. Maybe that's a question, Jeremy or Charles.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen what the traffic numbers are for Logan. Charles, if you feel comfortable trying to address that question, I'll give some time over to you.
Yeah, I can jump in. I'm guessing your question is about that crash rate table we showed that shows the crash rate for Logan Main Street is just a little bit higher than Heber's. And so you're wondering, well, how does the traffic volume compare? That part of Logan Main Street does have higher traffic volumes than Heber. It's about 10,000 vehicles per day more than Heber Main Street. So it does have more traffic. It has more crashes, but it also has more traffic. And so that results in it having a little bit higher crash rate than Heber's.
Thank you, Charles. Real quick, Charles, let me just ask a follow-up. Those crash rates on that table are based on a ratio, maybe ratio is not the right word, but they're crashes per so many vehicle miles traveled, right? So it does kind of try to account for roads that have higher traffic counts. It tries to equalize that out a little bit in that number. Is that correct?
That's right. You take the number of crashes divided by the length of the roadway you're looking at, and then also divided by the traffic volume on that segment of road.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, next question. It's from Tim Doherty. Is there any identified opposition to US 40 roadway improvements from stakeholders?
I would say, no, I don't think that there's any opposition to making improvements. I think all the stakeholders we've talked to are open to making improvements so that the transportation system can work better. We didn't talk a whole real in depth on what the transportation solutions might look like yet. Mostly we're trying to gather information on what are the issues. Any transportation solutions were very, very high level, such as, we know that there's been talk for a western bypass. There may be questions in the future about what if there's an eastern bypass. Do you have thoughts on that? Right. And so that was kind of the level of conversation as far as alternatives go at this point. So no real comments as far as opposition to making improvements.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Next question from Robert Davidson. We missed out on the start of the meeting. Did you discuss the proposed route to avoid Main Street in Heber?
We talked about the fact that Wasatch County and Heber City have on their transportation master plan and general plan, they have a western bypass shown, and this study and this project is aware of that, but we're not starting this project out with any predetermined solutions or outcomes. Again, right now we are trying to understand what exactly the transportation issues and needs are, and then next year we'll go into alternative development. So.
Okay. Next question, and we're still sticking with the chat questions. Haven't had any hands raised yet. From Eric Hunt Hawkins, for the LOS slide, what are the posted speed limits, both in the study area and on either end? Trying to understand context for the level of service breakdown.
That is a great question. I believe through Heber City, the speed limit on Main Street is 35 miles an hour. Charles, would you mind clarifying that and maybe speaking to if you know the speed limits on the ends?
Yeah, you're correct. The speed limit on Main Street through downtown is 35 miles an hour. Once you get north of about 600 or 750 north, the speed limit jumps up to 55 miles an hour and stays at 55, all the way until you get to SR 32. South of downtown, as you leave the US 189 intersection, sometimes called the hub intersection, the speed limits increase to 40. Sorry, it's just before you get to that intersection, when you're by the Walmart, it jumps up to 40. Then after you get past the 189 signal, it jumps up to 50. And then you get a similar effect on US 189. It's 45 miles an hour in front of the Walmart. And then as you get closer to the airport, it jumps up to 60 miles an hour. But those higher speed areas are outside of that particular graphic that was shown in the presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Charles. We have our first raised hand, and I can just call on you as Julie's iPhone. So I think that you've, let me unmute you, and then you should get a notification.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Yes.
Okay. So one of my concerns or questions is, I don't think, I know the bypass is on the plan. I don't think that is what we want for the valley. I don't think we want to be like the Wasatch Front. I think we'd prefer, granted, that's like me and the people I associate with. I think we would prefer something more like Jackson Hole, where we have a truck route. Because I think the issue is the trucks on Main Street, not the traffic, not pedestrian cars, because we want those through our Main Street. I think we want a vibrant Main Street where people want to stop and eat lunch and whatnot. And it's the trucks that are bringing the oil through, those are the problem. Like, even if those truckers, instead of coming down through Midway, went down through Provo Canyon instead of up over to Parley's, like, that would solve our problem. Because I think the biggest issue are the trucks that are coming onto Main Street. Is that, am I correct in assessing that that's our biggest problem, is the trucks on Main Street, not pedestrian, like not, what do you call the rest of us that aren't truckers?
Personal vehicles.
Yes, there you go.
So yes, I mean, I'm not sure I heard or understood the question, if there's a question, but we have heard that concern that trucks on Main Street are that's a concern. Trucks on Main Street are a concern. It definitely, we've heard that it doesn't make people feel safe, even walking on Main Street, and we've heard things along those lines that's definitely a concern, is the trucks. So appreciate that comment.
So I guess my question is if there were a bypass, how would we keep the personal vehicles on Main Street? Like, how would we keep, the traffic we do want on Main Street coming through our Main Street if there's a bypass? Like,
that is a great question. In fact, that's a question that as we get into alternative development, if that's one of our alternatives, is a bypass, and it appears that may be in conflict with what the community wants, that may be a question that we pose back to you guys to help us solve. But so far, my thoughts are on that is, if the desire is to get trucks off of Main Street but keep other cars on Main Street, somehow you would have to make the alternative route desirable to trucks and still keep destinations within Heber City for people to go to. But that's just my thoughts early on right now. We still have plenty of information to go through and some analysis to do and alternative development before we really dive deep into those sort of things. So, but it's a great question, and it's definitely something we're thinking about.
okay. Thank you. That's just my biggest concern, is that if we do a bypass, we're going to kill Main Street, and we're going to kill the feel of our valley. So
those are very valid concerns. Real quick before we jump off, I'll just ask the project team if there's anyone else that wanted to speak to that or had any thoughts on that. And if not, that's okay. I just thought if someone was really dying to speak to that, I'd let them.
I'll take you up on that opportunity. I think this is Naomi. I just wanted to mention or expand on what Jeremy said. So if there is a bypass alternative that moves forward for what we call detailed analysis in the EIS process, part of what we'll look at is impacts to social impacts. So that includes impacts to neighborhoods, impacts to the community, as well as economic impacts. And we also look at potential ways to mitigate that. So those are definitely concerns that will come up in the EIS process, and that we will look into, evaluate the impacts, and look at ways to minimize those impacts. So I don't know if that helps at all.
yeah. Well, I know with like the Legacy Highway, they put in a 15-year, you can't build commercial around it, but that's coming to an end. And then, I mean, how do you yes, you pushed back your economic impact for 15 years, but still eventually they're going to be hurt because their commercial has to move. Like, their commercial will move. And so I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is, I just don't know how we could, if there's a bypass, I don't know how we can save Main Street. So I guess my personal is something along the lines that Jackson Hole has done. It's pain for Jackson Hole, but somehow somehow we still have cars going through Jackson Hole.
Yep. I'll just jump in and say that we're going to move on to the next question, but this is a perfect example of the kind of comment that we want during the comment period. Like, we want to hear these kinds of thoughts and questions and concerns, because as we move to alternatives development later on in the process, those are the kinds of things that will help now define a purpose and need that kind of drives what kind of alternatives get developed. And so thank you for the comment. Let's see, we have another question from Heidi Franco. When and where will the stakeholder group names be posted?
Great question. So I think I touched on that briefly in the slide. So we will be posting, once we have that informational packaged up, kind of as Justin was saying, we're going to do with this presentation, we will post that stuff on our website. So I would anticipate maybe somewhere around the same time frame as this presentation being posted, we'll put out there. We have had our first stakeholder working group meeting, and so the summary from that and that information will be posted shortly. I don't want to put an exact time frame on that for the team because I don't know exactly what their workload is to get that out, but I'm sure it'll be soon.
Okay, we have another raised hand. Thanks, Jeremy. Ned, you're able to unmute. Great.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Yeah, so I have a question. It seems like there's a lot of concern around the commercial traffic of those large trucks, either box trucks, semi trucks, oil and gas trucks that come through the valley. I'm sure I'm not the only one that doesn't enjoy getting stuck behind those. So even though they make up a small number of vehicles, it seems like they have a really large impact in our valley, but they're going from the basin where they support economic activity down into the refinery or to other points and just transiting our valley without really contributing. So it seems like it's a big net negative for those trucks to be coming through, and that just from my perspective as a not traffic engineer, it seems like this project is in large part necessitated by the high impact of that commercial traffic. So I'm curious if those trucks do now pay any kind of toll or fee in order to come through, and if there is a recommendation for the building of some kind of project in order to support their traffic through our valley. Will the entities that are profiting from that traffic be contributing to that, or is it just going to be, entirely funded by taxpayers in order to solve this problem?
That is a great question. I'll tell you, I don't think I know the exact answer, but I'm sure I can find it. I'll tell you how I understand it right now, with the caveat that I may have to clarify in the future. But my understanding is this is a federal highway. It's on the national highway network or something to that effect, and so therefore we don't really have the ability at UDOT to impose a tax or a fee or something like that on certain types of vehicles. The intent of the National Highway Network is to get vehicles, especially and including commercial vehicles, to and from. And so I don't think we have the ability to impose a special tax or fee on those trucks. And so then that leads to what I believe the other answer is yes, that will be, that means that this will just be supported with tax dollars and not any sort of special funding from the trucking industry. So, but again, I will actually make myself a little note to verify that I gave correct information. And if I'm wrong in any of that, we'll find a way to post that information on the website or something like that. Thank you for that question.
Sure thing.
Thanks, Ned. Okay, back to our written questions from Doherty's iPhone. If route selection is later in the process, what, if any, impact does the acquisition of right-of-way to date have? So there, you mentioned there's been right-of-way acquired already. Route selection comes later in the process. How do those two things relate?
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I understood it. Okay, so as you just reiterated, Justin, we have already acquired, or the county and the city have already acquired right away. Our process is not at route selection yet. So the question, I'm guessing, has to do with if a different solution is come about or a slightly different route is chosen, what happens to that right of way that's already purchased. And the answer is the county and the city would then, whatever piece of property they have, would be able to sell off that property that they've already acquired. And that money would go back to resupply the funds that were used to purchase that property. I hope that answers the question that was asked.
Okay. From Brad Weiniger, is the crash data for Heber for only the highlighted section of 40, and he has in parentheses 5th north to 12th south, or is it for a larger section of 40 where there are higher speed limits?
Charles, if it's all right, if you understood that question, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Yeah, the data presented in the presentation today is just for that highlighted section of Main Street. Now that's 12 south to about 750 north, so a little bit longer than the coordinates you listed in your question. But we've also been doing crash data analysis for other pieces of US 480 and also pieces of US 189. So there's a much bigger analysis that's going on. But today in our presentation, we focused on this downtown Main Street comparison. That's part of what we've heard as we've talked to different stakeholders, is there's a lot of concern about safety on Main Street. So that's where our focus in the data was today.
Thank you, Charles.
Okay. Not seeing any hands still, so we're going to continue on with the written question. Again, if you want to raise your hand and speak, may have to move around your mouse, touch the screen, but you need to get the participant list up, and then you'll have the option to raise your hand. If you're on the phone, *9 will raise your hand. From Russell Piper, has UDOT considered using smart street technology to smooth and speed the flow of traffic while we wait for actual project construction completion?
That is a great question, and I do not know the answer. Charles, I have no idea if you know with the people that you work with at the department, if you have any idea on that.
Yeah, well, Smart Street can probably refer to a number of things, and so I'll take a guess as to what exactly you're referring to. There's ways to allow vehicles to talk to each other so that they drive more smoothly, and of course you have to have some level of automation in those vehicles so that they essentially drive themselves and more smoothly than human drivers do. But you can also have infrastructure where the traffic signals can talk to vehicles and inform vehicles of what speed they should be driving. So there's less of the accordion effect in the traffic stream. So I'm guessing that's the type of treatment that you're talking about. And right now that technology is still in development and has not been fully implemented, anywhere in the United States to the degree of having a major effect on roadway. There's a lot of pilot projects and test programs, but right now it's not at a state where it can be implemented. 5 or 10 years from now, it's possible we could be having a different conversation. And this is a technology that is in hand. It's something we can implement right away. But right now, it's into the future. So I think it's something we can consider, but it's going to take some time for us to really understand what effect it would have on a road like Heber Main Street.
Okay. So I'll just note, at the beginning, we said that we would ask people to stick to one question or one comment, just in the interest of getting through everyone. We've got some typed questions that have been second questions from folks. We've also got some other folks that have raised their hand that have already spoken. So we're going to go ahead and get through everybody's question once, and then if there's time, we'll come back to the second questions, just for everybody's benefit. Looks like we've got another raised hand by the name of Tracy. You can unmute at this time.
Hi, thanks. I was wondering if you haven't had any communication with Heber Light and Power and Rocky Mountain Power about where this bypass road is going to go?
We have had communication with Rocky Mountain Power and Heber Light and Power as far as the location of the planned bypass by Wasatch County and Heber City, as far as it relates to their planned future corridor and planned future substation. So yes, I have had conversations with them, and so has Wasatch County and Heber City, from my understanding. So,
Have there been any routes that have been determined by those entities that we're not aware of?
sorry, for some reason I didn't capture all that. Will you say it one more time?
I was wondering if there was any determinations made by you and those other entities to determine where the bypass route was going to go that we're not aware of.
So right now, this process, we have not made any determinations on where. We don't even know if there will be a bypass built by UDOT. We're not far along in this process yet. There is a bypass that shows up on Wasatch County's transportation master plan, and a bypass that shows up on Heber City's general plan. And I'm sure that they've been coordinating with the power companies as far as how that planned bypass and the location of this power equipment interact and where they'll be. But with this process, we're not far enough along to make any determinations as far as we haven't even started alternative analysis yet to start digging into those sort of details.
Okay, I've been in most of your meetings, if not all of your meetings in the last 5 years. The last map we've all seen was, let's just talk about the northwest corridor of this bypass road. Maybe like a year and a half ago, there was an A, B, and C route for the northwest corridor. And even in that interlocal meeting where we were all together, one public official said, you know what, I'm not even comfortable with that A, B, and C route on the map because it insinuates that there's only 3 options, when in fact you haven't made any determination on the northwest corridor of where that was going to go. And so even the last map I've seen had an A, B, and C route.
Yes. So that was, I mentioned earlier that we have us, UDOT, and Heber City last year completed a corridor planning study. And that's the map that you're referring to, was from that corridor planning study.
Right.
And that corridor planning study did not make any recommendations. We looked at a few routes up in there in the north section. We had 3 different routes we were looking at. Down in the south, we had multiple routes, multiple different options. And we were mostly looking at how traffic would flow. But it made no recommendations. What came out of that study is that there needs to be a full-blown environmental study done, which is what we are starting now. And as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, we understand, we have that information from that previous study, we have information from the county and from the city, and that's informing us. But right now, with this study, we are just trying to understand exactly what the transportation needs are. Yes, I know that there's been previous maps, previous studies, and people have drawn lines and said, hey, this should work, this could work, this could work. But as far as this study is concerned, we're not that far yet.
And you haven't made, you're officially saying you haven't made any determinations where this bypass is going to go.
We don't even know if there is a bypass to be considered yet, as far as this study is concerned.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I want to just acknowledge there have been some follow-up comments in the chat to questions that have happened earlier from the same folks. And so I want you to know that those are captured, and we'll keep those in the chat record of this meeting. But again, make the distinction that if you want it to be an official comment, we need you to go to the website and submit it in the form, of email, or a voicemail or whatever. Again, those are there are many options to provide formal comment during the comment period. And for the dialogue, the healthy dialogue that's happening in the chat, we definitely want that to be captured as official comments on the record. So we're going to go, again, we've got a few repeats. So we're going to get through all those who have not yet been able to ask a question, and then we'll circle back to those that have already spoken or asked a question. Let's see. This is more of I think a comment than a question, but from Glenda Gray to everyone. It seems to me that the city wants to expand the airport for Park City for larger jets by moving the Highway 189 and move the traffic into the city housing. I could support a bypass that uses Highway 189, but I don't want the highway moved or a larger airport. So I don't know, Jeremy, if you want to respond to that, or if we just want to encourage you to make sure that finds its way into a formal comment.
Yeah, I think at this point we'll just again, I'll reiterate that we are aware of what that Heber City is working on, or has just recently updated their general plan, and we are aware that they are working on an update to the airport. But yeah, let's save that comment for please add it, submit it officially in the public comment during the public comment period.
Okay, from Beth Price, is this study looking at transportation needs within Heber City or within the entire Heber Valley?
So right now, we are trying to understand the transportation issues, concerns, problems for the Heber Valley, mostly related to US 40. We're not really looking at SR 113 or SR 222 in the Heber Valley. Our focus is more on the US highways. But currently we're trying to understand what the issues are as far as transportation in the Heber Valley. And we understand from the traffic analysis we've done so far that the greatest traffic impacts are in Heber City. So I hope that answers the question. I hope that doesn't sound like I'm trying to dodge the question, but.
Okay, got just a few more that are first time questions or comments from M. Holden. The preliminary planning report did identify 3 alternative alignments for the north segment, for example, A, B, and C, which was referenced earlier, but that a recommendation as to which would need to wait for more detailed environmental analysis. Are those alignments still starting points for the NEPA planning effort? I think you've spoken to this a little bit, but maybe expand again on that.
Okay, yeah. So yes, that is information that we have that we're using to inform this process. And again, at this point, we're trying to understand more holistically the transportation issues and concerns and needs in Heber Valley and Heber City Main Street. And we have not gone into alternative development yet to even kind of go into those sort of details.
Okay. From David Halleck, excuse me. Is the intent of the design process still to optimize the route in order to receive federal funding? And if so, how do we account for the loss of local control? Also, if the rail line gets put in, the crude oil trucks will go away. So the second half is kind of a comment, and the question is with regard to optimize the route in order to receive federal funding. And if so, how do we account for the loss of local control?
Those are great questions. Let's see here. So yes, we are trying to optimize mobility through the valley, and mobility is more than just vehicle travel. Mobility includes pedestrian, cyclist, and all of that, right? And I think I mentioned before, our vision, our goal is to understand transportation issues and develop transportation solutions to optimize mobility. Now, are we're trying to do something special to make sure we receive federal funding? No, but this is a federal highway, and we will have to, any changes, you know, if a solution that is proposed is to realign the federal highway US 40, FHWA would need to be involved in that. And so that they are one of our partners, and we would be working with them on that. I hope that answers that question. There was a second question to that, if I remember right, Justin. Can you remind me? Had something to do with
Just the how do we account for the loss of local control?
Okay. I honestly don't really know how to respond to that portion of the question. Through this process, we're trying to make sure that the community is well informed of the process we're following. As mentioned, we're following it's the NEPA process, and we're following that. It's and as we go throughout it, we're getting as much public and community input so that we can understand their goals, their desires, their concerns as we develop purpose and need, and even as we go into alternative development. So I really hope that there's not this feeling that the locals have zero control. But yeah, I don't know how else to respond to that. I don't know if there's anyone else on the project team that's dying to tackle that one, but I'll just say that I don't really know how to answer it other than what I've done. Yeah, Jeff.
If I can, so regarding that question about loss of local control, we're throughout this entire process, we're going to be working very closely with the cities there in the Heber Valley, as well as with the local state, all the stakeholders within the Heber Valley area. So if there is a sense of losing control over decisions, that's where the process is set up to help make any decisions or identify any solutions in an objective way, as much of an objective way as possible, so that there is a balance between community needs and desires and what any future transportation solution could be. So it may be a misstatement to say that local control is lost. Does the department have some responsibility on state federal highways within the state? Absolutely. And we are given that authority to make some of those decisions, but we don't do it in a vacuum. And we do take the needs and desires of the community in tandem with all the federal regulations, like you saw in that video presentation. Any major transportation decision like this requires an objective process, and that's why we're following the NEPA process, so that local communities are involved in the decision should something be made.
Justin, this is Naomi. I noticed that Mr. Halleck clarified his question a little bit, and I think it would be useful to kind of incorporate that now, since I'm thinking maybe we could provide a more full answer with his clarification.
Yeah, Naomi, good. So just he commented, it was explained to me that the route had to meet certain federal flow standards in order to receive funding. The route choices that were made were directed by the need to receive the federal funding. As the EIS process was explained to me, it would be based entirely upon numbers. So I think he's just drawing a distinction between how a design is put together in terms of trying to qualify it for federal funding versus going through the process that points to a particular alternative.
Okay, let me clarify that response a little bit, and I apologize if we gave misinformation in the last study, but we were trying to meet certain standards because during that study, our understanding was kind of like was mentioned so far in this meeting, there's a desire to get trucks off of the Heber Main Street, the downtown area. And so we were designing to certain standards so that trucks could use that, and then the bypass could become US 40. It wasn't necessarily to receive federal funding, but it was so that it could become the federal highway on the national network. So yeah, it didn't necessarily have to do with funding, but it had to do with designing in a way in which it could become US 40.
And to reiterate, and then we'll move on, that analysis, that process will be used as data to inform this process, but those alternatives, those designs are not driving any of the potential alternatives in this study.
Thank you.
A good way to state it, Jeremy?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So we have a couple more questions that are first time, and then we'll start cycling back through those of you that have asked an additional question, or those of you who are still hanging on with your hand raised that we've heard from. Let's see. Todd Gray, the traffic on Main Street looked like the backup corrects itself after First South. Is this because a lot of traffic turns off to go to Midway?
I'll take a stab at it, and then I think Charles will probably be able to clarify what I say, if that's okay, Charles. I think you're talking about, I guess either direction, first northbound or southbound. My thought is, I think maybe some of it is because people turn off to Midway, but I think, yeah, a lot of it has to do with there's this offset between Center Street and First South, which are on one side of Main Street, your major east-west, and then the other side of Main Street, the major east-west, and they're offset. And so this area that's that's the center of town has this offset for your east-west. This is where all the traffic is coming to. And so as you come into town, you're backing up as you get there. And then as you get past that, you're getting past where the issues are. And so things free up. Again, I think Charles will be able to explain it way better. Maybe I should have just not said anything. Go ahead, Charles.
Jeremy, you did a great job. You're right. It's the part of its traffic turns off to go on to First South, but the other piece is that you have those two signals at Center and First South. They're really close together, just a block apart. And that has a way of gumming up the system a little bit. Once you get past that, you don't have another signal till 0.4 of a mile at 6 South. And so there's less impedance for traffic flow, and you don't, and traffic can proceed more smoothly.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, from M. Labarge. Maybe I butchered that. Maybe I got it right. Apologies if I did butcher it. Based on the data the slides provided, trucks and other large vehicles only account for 8% of current traffic load. Also, the data showed that more than 50% of the traffic load on Main Street is local traffic. A bypass may not alleviate enough of the heavy traffic volumes of Heber Valley for the future 2050 traffic goals. By extrapolation from the slides shared, since we can assume that by 2050, more than half the traffic will still be local. Is there a chart or data that does or will show how much of a traffic diminishment will be gained by a potential bypass versus the cost such a project will impose upon the community?
No, not yet. Again, right now we're just gathering data. That traffic analysis was just to kind of set give you an idea of what we anticipate the problem is, but we have not gone into alternative development or alternative analysis yet. So we have not made, we have not gone through that analysis to be able to provide that sort of data as of yet. I think this may be a good time to note, and maybe it's not, but as we go throughout this process, we will always kind of be referring back to and comparing to a no build situation. That's always something that will be on the table. It helps us understand things if we're comparing back to this no build. And honestly, it's always an option in the NEPA process and through the EIS process that we don't do anything, right? That's always an alternative that will be carried through to compare to, and maybe that's the best solution. We don't know, but I just thought now might be a good time to make that point. So, but thank you for that question.
Okay, so we've been through everyone that had an original or a first question. We've got Julie on the line again with her hand raised. Julie, would you like to ask another question?
There we go. One of my questions was, somebody just asked about, in the meantime, of what we can do for traffic. I was just wondering if moving all of the trucks to the center lane, like specifying what lane that trucks can go through Heber, if that's helpful, or just in the meantime, like until we decide the best way to handle traffic, are there things we can do, like diverting trucks to only one lane or something like that?
That's a great question. I don't know about truck lane restrictions, what we can do there. Again, yeah, that's something I would have to look into. I don't have an answer as far as what sort of restrictions we can give them. But there probably are solutions, interim solutions that can be incorporated right now as we continue to work on solving this problem for the long term. I know during our corridor planning study, Heber City was a partner in that with us, and they were also kind of doing some downtown improvement study as far as transportation goes, and they had someone kind of working on ideas on ways to make improvements. I don't think all of those ideas were transportation related. I think there were some other ideas as far as like walkability and trying to make destinations to bring people down there. But I know it is something that's been thought about. I know that I've had conversations with Heber City regarding that. But yes, there probably are. I just don't know any of them right off the top of my head. But I'm sure there are ways in which the city or UDOT can maybe make some improvements.
Yeah, I just know as a cyclist, I would love to not be riding right next to the semis. Like I would love them to be in the middle lane. It would be a little bit like, it would feel more comfortable. I ride it anyways because I just don't care, but it would feel better.
You
Hey,
sound
Jeremy.
pretty brave. Yes.
This is Matt Parker. So Terry Newell has had discussions with the trucking industry about this, and the trucking industry did indicate that they would try to get everybody to use that center lane rather than the right lane, but it's still kind of a crapshoot of whether or not they actually do it.
Okay.
So they are encouraged to use that the inside lane, not the outside lane.
Do you know what Vernal does? Because I was under the impression that Vernal had some sort of lane restrictions like that going through theirs.
I believe it's the same thing because we're over that Vernal area as well.
So they're just encouraged. There's no like legitimate like restrictions.
Well, we would have to rely on highway patrol to be able to enforce that, and I don't even know if it's something that we can do legally anyway. So it's mostly it's kind of just encouraging them to do it, and like I said, I don't know that we can legally enforce it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. And thanks,
Julie.
Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
To give everybody a little bit of context, Matt, I guess we're calling this a phone a friend because Matt is a Heber Valley resident and a UDOT employee also. So thanks for chiming in on that. Matt, you raised your hand. Did you just want to chime in on that particular point, or do you have other comment you'd like to make?
Just on that particular point.
Great.
Jeremy's doing a good job.
And Matt's also a cyclist. As
Yeah.
well. He gets it.
Good to hear from you, Matt. Okay, we have I'm going to chime in with this comment because I think it relates to the theme of looking for opportunities to improve the situation even as an EIS proceeds. This was a follow-up to a comment or a question asked earlier about the smart street technology and smoothing the flow of traffic on Main Street. Russell Piper said he just meant the coordination of traffic signals like is used on University through Provo. And I suspect that's already something that's being done on Heber Main Street. Jeff's nodding his head, so.
Okay, I was gonna say, I would suspect so, but I'd be happy to follow up with our signal and traffic and safety team and just see if there's improvements that can be made or anything like that. But I would assume that that's something that they've already been looking into, so.
So we've got a second question from Heidi Franco. The presentation said that your graphs numbers were based on UDOT completing other traffic projects in the valley, such as the River Road intersection flyover. Are there any other UDOT projects that will also be completed for your chart numbers? If so, what are they?
Ooh, that is a great question. I'm going to answer it generally, and then I'm going to ask Charles if he knows more specifically. But what we're referring to in that long-range plan is anything on MAGs or UDOT's, or I believe even the city or county's long-range plan for transportation improvements. We assume that they're completed when they are projected to be completed on that long-range plan. And then in this no-build situation, we say, okay, we see that this is on the county's long-range plan, but we see that that has a direct correlation to what we're trying to look at. So we're going to pull that out and say that doesn't get done. Anyways, I went a little bit more specific than I meant to. Charles, please, if you have some clarification, go ahead and add.
You're exactly right. I was only going to go more specific, so maybe I better.
No, that's fine. You go more specific because.
Yeah, you're right. It's just about every planned project on these agency plans except for a bypass. So some of these notable projects include widening US 40 from Heber out to Daniels Canyon, to the mouth of the canyon, and widening US 189 as it goes around Deer Creek Reservoir to make it a 4-lane road.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, we can't see everybody at once, which is a bit of a challenge, but we've heard that there's maybe somebody actually raising their hand on video, Rachel Caller. And so we'd like to get to you before we get to, there's a couple of people again that have spoken already that we'll get to if we have time, but Rachel, you have the floor for the moment.
Thank you, Justin. I just want to thank you guys for the information. And I thought it was really noteworthy that the north-south really is at the heart of our community. And if we don't create a bypass, how will our local residents travel north and south in our community? And my biggest fear as a city council representative is that without this bypass, we will be choke holding our citizens and they won't want to travel down our local Main Street. So I guess my question really is specific to property. For years, we've been told that the city and the county needed to purchase property so that there could be a clear path for the bypass. And I just want to know, is that true? And does the city and the county, are they still responsible for the purchase of the property that will eventually become the Heber Valley Parkway, if indeed the EIS study says that that is what needs to happen? Thank you.
Those are great questions. Stay ready to unmute yourself just in case I don't get to all of them and you want some clarification. Starting towards the end of those questions, because that's the freshest in my mind. If the preferred alternative is a bypass to the west, and it either directly follows or closely follows what is in the Wasatch County and Heber City plans, at that point, I believe it would then start becoming UDOT's responsibility to start acquiring the right-of-way that's needed, because at that point we would have identified that as this is the solution that UDOT came up with, and now UDOT's going to take this on and become the responsible party for moving this project forward. As of right now, if the city or county have desires to continue to preserve that, I believe it's their responsibility to continue to preserve that. And like I said, that's their plans. And in the past, UDOT has always been supportive of those plans, right? UDOT and the city and the county have talked about the potential for help to US 40, right? US 40, we've known for a while that at some point in the future, it's going to reach a point where it just can't handle the traffic loading unless something's done. And so I believe in the past, UDOT's been supportive of the counties and cities' plans for a bypass. And up until recently, we haven't really, and I may be wrong, but my understanding is up until recently, we haven't really got too involved in directing and saying, this is what you have to do, and this is right. Like we've given suggestions. Yes, you should start preserving a corridor so that it could make it easier in the future and so forth. Anyways, I feel like I'm just rambling now. Did I answer any or all of the questions you had, Rachel?
Yeah, I guess it's still on the onus of the county and the city then to continue to acquire property or preserve property from further development until we get some clear answers from UDOT.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Jeremy, I would add that there is a corridor agreement, so we will reimburse the county or the city for purchases that they are making if we use it for the bypass. And,
Yes.
and so that is in place right now.
Yes, thank you for that clarification and that added information. Appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. All right, I'm just going to do a quick time check. We're at 7:41. We're going to end questions roughly between 7:50 and 7:55. So I'm going to just put one more call out. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like to type in the chat box, we've been through all of the questions and comments that have been submitted thus far. But feel free to submit another one, especially if this is for a first question or comment. We've heard from a number of you on audio, and we've got 3 folks that we've heard from that we're going to give a chance to hear from again, unless we have anyone else raise their hand, or again, *9 on the phone, or find your participant list and use the raise hand feature on the bottom of the screen. So Ned, let's come back to you for now.
Great, thank you. So I'm curious about the scope of the project here. We've heard a lot about bypass, but I've also heard discussion about mobility in general. Does it fall within the scope of the study to analyze or study and make recommendations about things like buses or cyclability? Someone brought up the idea of moving all this oil by rail. Is that inside the scope of the project?
Some of it, yes. As far as moving the oil by rail, that kind of falls outside of our realm of expertise. I know we're the Department of Transportation, but we don't actually own any rail lines. As far as I know, we haven't made any plans to start building rail to help with that. That may be an excellent comment to make officially, and just ask that question. Has the department ever thought about getting into that? I don't know exactly what our response would be to that, but as far as cyclists and pedestrians go, for sure, we're going to be considering how our alternative development and our solutions would impact those forms of transportation, for sure. UTA is a partner of ours, and so public transportation may be another thing for us to be considering while we go throughout this process. And again, I would encourage comments, if that's something that you guys think is important to the community or things of that nature. Please give us those comments so that we can make sure that that's officially recorded, so it helps develop and our purpose and need, which will help drive the rest of the project. That's a great question. Did I answer partially all of it? I don't want to leave you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was curious in particular about, modality of trying to see if making the city more cycle friendly or the whole valley more cycle friendly, in addition to even things like non-traffic concerns like air quality. So maybe making electric vehicles a more viable option here in the valley, because we've got all of 2 electric vehicle charging stations. So I'm curious if that sort of thing falls within the scope to make recommendations for mobility in the valley in general, rather than simply, hey, the oil barons are bringing their trucks through here and it stinks. So are those things within the scope of the study?
I think there are things that if they're commented on, we would think about, and they would, if they're obviously concerns to the community. Jeff or Naomi, I'm going to invite you guys if you have more information or can help me answer that question a little better.
I'll jump in real quick.
Thank you.
So I think with regard to active transportation modes, increasing bikeability and walkability, those are certainly elements that we will consider and look at incorporating into any alternative that we identify to the extent that we can within that alternative. With regard to transit bus lines, currently the implementation of transit bus lines is not within the jurisdiction of UDOT. But if there was a plan to implement transit of some sort in the area, we would try to build a roadway. We would build a roadway profile to accommodate that, but it's not within our scope and our jurisdiction currently to implement transit routes. And then with regard to things like EV charging stations, that's a great question, and no one's ever asked that before, but my assumption would be that because those would have to be installed and maintained, probably those would be kind of something that we would pass off the implementation of to the local jurisdiction. Those are just some thoughts on those items.
And just to add to Naomi just a little bit, there are the regional planning organization for the Heber Valley area, so MAG, has been working on some long-range planning, which includes transit. I know the county has a trails master plan for the county as well. Those types of things, for example, with the trail plan, that's something that, depending on what decisions what's determined during this study, would help inform what amenities or what elements could be incorporated into any future transportation solution. So there's this long-range planning aspect that's happening and has happened in the past, over the past several years, to incorporate some of those types of things in the future.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Naomi, for helping me out. Sorry, Justin.
No, you're great. We have 2 final hands raised, and let's see if we can get to both of them before we wrap the meeting up. Tracy, you have the floor.
Thank you again. I was just going to bring up a suggestion on how to make things better now while we're waiting for the study to be done. One of which is on Main Street, a designated left turn time. And I think right now the left turn is with the green light, but we don't have our own designated left turn time. So there have been times where people have been there for 1 or 2 turns throughout the rotation because they could not turn left. And so, like on First South, Center Street, both those going in either direction, that would be a big help to get people across Main Street. This is part of our problem, is we can't get across Main. So that's my suggestion.
Okay.
Excellent. Appreciate that suggestion.
Thank you, Tracy. And then Heidi, before we let Heidi go, I just want to note Sean Seeger from MAG, I think as a follow-up to Jeff, has posted a link to a recent transit study in the Valley, kind of to speak to the conversation we had with Ned earlier. So thanks, Sean. And Heidi, we'll give you the final question here.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending, and thank you for this presentation. I really appreciate it. Obviously there's a long ways to go. My question is this: on the Heber City Council, I see the traffic studies that the developers are giving to us in submitting for proposed annexations or developments. And even the Sorensen annexation alone that's already been completed is saying in their traffic study that they would need Highway 40 increased by a lane on each side going north out of Heber City. Now, I know that their population projections are included in your charts, and that's fine. But given that traffic study, given the other traffic studies in the North Village area that are also saying that Highway 40 would need to be increased going north out of the city, I'm just saying, how do I say this? How is it that UDOT will assess the need to increase the lanes in Highway 40 going north out of the city? And then is that already projected? Is that already taken into account, increased lanes going north on Highway 40? Is that already taken into account in your downtown Main Street charts and graphs that you've shown us tonight?
Great questions. I'll probably lean on Charles a little bit just to verify, but my understanding is, to answer that last part, that currently that widening north of Heber is not on our long range plan, and so it was not incorporated into the analysis for 2050 at this point. Is that correct, Charles?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. As far as assessing those needs and trying to determine how and when to build an extra lane in each direction north of Heber City itself, really it goes, it'll be part of our normal STIP process. So we will identify a need, and it'll get put on that on our STIP, and then get prioritized and then funded, and would move forward that way. Something such as that likely would not go through an EIS process such as this, right? It's a widening of an already
Existing street, right?
Existing facility, and who knows, that may be the solution that we come up with here for this project as well. But if it's something like that where it's a specific, hey, we have this development and it's causing this need, and so I don't know, is there someone else on the team that wants to answer that a little bit more clearly than I did?
And
go
just
ahead, Heidi.
Follow up with this: if and when Highway 40 is widened north of our current downtown, that to me would create more of a logjam without a bypass road to come into the 2 lanes that we currently have in our downtown area, and would even create a greater need for some kind of a bypass road. And I don't know if you're assessing that right now, but I'm seeing that in, like I say, every traffic study that is coming in north of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments and questions. And I just noticed a comment pop up from Rachel, kind of related to this, about maybe we should consider the if we consider a bypass, maybe consider it continuing north instead of tying back into US 40 just barely north of town. Thank you for that suggestion, and I would suggest please put that in as official, as an official comment, as we mentioned before, through those different methods that we have to help us completely understand as we develop our purpose and need. Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you everybody for navigating the technology waters. I'm pleased that we heard from so many different folks, both in type form and we got to hear several voices tonight. I'll just note that Sean Seeger, again, from the Mountain Land Association of Governments, the planning organization for this particular valley and others, has posted some helpful links in the chat. One is to information about population and employment projections. One is to the transportation plan for the valley. And so for those that are interested, you might want to just snag those links before the meeting ends, because then they'll go away. But some quick parting reminders, and then I'll turn the floor back to Jeremy. First of all, if you haven't, and you don't have to do this right now, because this isn't going away, but if you go to the site where you got the link for this video and click on participant sign in, let us know you were here so that we have your contact information for future communication. That's under participant sign in, and the link has been posted in the chat. Again, the recording of this entire meeting will be available on the website within the next few days. And then Jeremy already gave a great reminder about this, but a lot of good questions and comments tonight. Let's make sure we capture those as formal comments during this comment period. Please spread the word among your neighbors, your friends, your colleagues, that the comment period goes from now until September 26th. And you can visit our project website, which has also been posted here with a link straight to the comment section. And there's also contact information on the website, so you can reach out to us. So that's, I think I'm at an end, Jeremy. I've used all my words. I yield the floor to you to wrap us up.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it. Appreciate you moderating for us tonight. I did notice as you were giving your closing remarks that there was a comment about a link that doesn't work. If you would mind commenting specifically what link that is, and the project team can be working on making sure that that gets fixed or whatever as I wrap up, so you guys can get links before this project ends that work. Thank you. If we can go ahead and forward to the next slide. Just put a reminder out about the public comment period. It starts tonight and goes through September 26th. Please go to our website, hebervalleyeis.udot.utah.gov. You can email us at hebervalleyeis@utah.gov. And then when we get a chance to forward the slides, we'll also pull up a connect with us slide that has all this information outlined, and also has a just kind of a parting thought about what our process is and where we're at in it. We're still very early in our process. We are very grateful for all the information that has been provided to us tonight, and we look forward to gathering more information as we go throughout this process. Just as a reminder, the objective of the public meeting tonight is to educate on the NEPA process. It's to identify issues that should be evaluated in detail, to help us form scope of analysis to be conducted, and to provide opportunity for public involvement on defining the purpose and need and considerations for a range of alternatives. This meeting does constitute the initiation of the NEPA process, and is considered part of the scoping process. But the EIS process doesn't actually start until we file our notice of intent. So a separate EIS public scoping meeting after the release of the NOI may or may not be conducted, but at a minimum you'll be able to view and make comments on the purpose and need at that point. So with that, thank you everybody for being here tonight. We really appreciate your time, and we appreciate the comments, and we look forward to continuing to work with you guys throughout this process. I hope everyone has a great night.